welcome to Friendship. My name is Brandon. I'm the director of student ministries here, and I get the great privilege of teaching again this week, part two of our series, The Good Work. Now, last week we started this series. We looked at the life of Nehemiah and looked at how the heartbreak in his life wasn't the end, it was really the beginning because it caused him to have motivation. It caused him to know what his calling was, the thing that God had planned for him, and how the very same thing is really true about us, where heartbreak in our life isn't the end, rather it's the beginning. It causes us to know what we're called to do and the things that God wants to accomplish in and through our lives. But as we get started this morning, I want us to kind of think of some of the things that we've accomplished, some of the things that you have done. Maybe it was the first kind of moments in your life, and as you look at those moments, many times those are the moments in which your parents would love to take pictures. And I know when we were little, maybe you're the kind of person like me who didn't really like the photos to be taken of. Like, it's not like, oh, I don't want to smile at every 5 minutes for you to take a picture. But the moments are there, and you want to take the pictures of those moments, and you want to save them. Maybe your parents are the kind of people who would make a scrapbook. So they would take the picture, they would then, after maybe it was a vacation or just a couple years, they would take all these pictures, print them out, and put them in a scrapbook. Or maybe it was just a box, and it was all your pictures, and you have this big old tote box of all the pictures of your childhood, of all these things, right? But it's these moments, these first times, right? When you're young, it's the first time you lost a tooth. It's the first time you sat up, the first time you crawled or walked. But as you grew older, it was the first time that you did things that you actually had to really work at, right? It's those moments that you rode a bike for the first time. And it was like you got on the bike and you've tried before, but this is the first time you did it without training wheels, with no one holding onto the back of the bike, no one's walking alongside of you when you're doing it, and you're not doing it in the grass but on the street. It's those moments in which it happened the first time. Or maybe it was something else you worked really hard at. Maybe it was playing sports, like playing baseball or softball, and it's the first time you hit the ball, or playing soccer, it's the first time you scored a goal, or football, the first time you made a touchdown. It's these moments that are the first times in your life. And when you get these things, when a kid accomplishes these things, you cheer them on, right? You're excited with them and you celebrate with them because of the hard work that is involved in doing it. Maybe for you, it's these accomplishments were playing music and getting that first solo or first guitar part or first piano part that you had at school, and it was these moments in which you kind of showed off all of the work that you had. And of course, you took a picture, you got pictures taken, and now you can look back at it, because some of these first, right, when you're little, you don't remember, so you can look back upon them and you can kind of remember them. But the reality is, these don't happen. Most of these things that you have these pictures of, they don't happen easily. They take work. The first time you do a lot of things, it takes work. It takes that effort. And then because of those things, you celebrate with them. But the reality is, things to accomplish in your life, they take effort. They take work at it. They're not just pick up and do. You're not successful the first time you do them, though we really wish we were. But that's the reality. And that's the big idea for today. If you kind of want to kind of place that, is if you do the work, you make a difference. When you put in the time and you put in the work, something happens. The outcome comes out. And so you're able to do things and really be successful in them. Now, if it's baseball, you got to have those practices. If you're a parent of someone who's played sports, then you know the countless repetitions of doing things to make it work, and you're excited about that. If it's music, it's practicing on that song. It's all these different things. And as we look at that, I want us to kind of look at these things and look at how when we put in the effort and we put in the work, that the outcome is going to happen. And so last week we looked at, the motivation for that, but this week I want to kind of look more at the preparation, the application of doing the work. Because a lot of times I think we get stuck, right? We get stuck. We have the motivation. We know why we're doing things. We know even what we're called to do, but we get stuck in this aspect of, how do I actually do it? How do I get to the point where I'm actually doing it? Like, have you ever been overwhelmed? Most of us, right? We've been overwhelmed. If you go to a restaurant and they have like that, some of those restaurants have those really long menus. I'm thinking like most of the Mexican restaurants. You flip over, it's like page after page after page. They're all the same items. But there's page after page after page of items on there of food. And anybody ever been overwhelmed when you get one of those menus and you're just like, I don't know what to pick? And so if you're with a group of friends or your family, what do? The waiter comes up and asks you what do you want to order. And like, I'll go last. I'll go last, and I'll just find something else that someone ordered that sounded pretty good, and I'll pick that. Or maybe it's not that there's so many options, but it's a restaurant that you go to a lot, and you have that favorite couple options. It's like 2 or 3 things. I get 2 or 3 things there, but you can't remember, or you can't figure out, hey, this is what I want. And so you're kind of having this moment where you're overwhelmed with a couple good options, and you're like, I don't know how to make the decision. Or here's the real thing, right? Maybe you haven't even made it to the restaurant yet, right? And you're just like, I don't know where to go. And what do? You ask your friends, you ask your family, hey, where do you want to go and eat? And what's their response? I don't care. You pick. And you're like, this is not helpful. I didn't know. That's why I asked you. I asked first, so you have to pick, right? Where a lot of times we're overwhelmed with options. And a lot of times when we're overwhelmed with something, then we just tend to stop and freeze and don't do anything. But the reality is, that doesn't really help us very often, right? Because if you are picking what you're having for dinner, and it is 6 o'clock, 6:30, and you haven't picked it yet, and now you're freezing, and you don't make a decision, what do you get? Hangry, right? You get hungry and angry at the same time, and everything that someone does makes you jump at them, yell at them, fuss at them, and you don't make a decision. Well, the same thing's true about our lives when we're saying, hey, how do I actually do the thing that God has called me to do? Well, when we sit here and freeze, nothing's ever accomplished. It doesn't help us move through. And so when we're looking at that, we've got to kind of figure out, hey, what do I do for that first step? How do I make that first step? And that's what I want to look at today, is how we can actually do that. The 4 steps to kind of starting the work. How do we get started with the work? And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at how Nehemiah started his work and how we can kind of do that in our own lives. And the first step is seek God. In Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, it says, early in the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence, so the king asked me, why are you looking sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled. And then I was terrified. But I replied, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. And the king asked, well, how can I help you? And this part right here, with a prayer, he responded. He was praying to God, with a prayer to the God of heaven. See, King Artaxerxes, he saw there was an issue, so he asked Nehemiah, hey, what's going on? And Nehemiah lays out kind of what's going on. And then he asks him, hey, how can I help you? And that's where he goes, like, I need to go to God. And it's not the first time he's going to God, but we see this as a habitual thing in his life. He's going to God regularly. That's kind of this aspect here, really, of seeking God. It's that I'm going to God time and time again. I'm constantly seeking after his will and his guidance. And see, in everything we do, we should go to God because it gives us this direction. I think we've all made a decision before without thinking. Anybody been there before? You make a decision, it's kind of just rash, and you kind of didn't think through it. You certainly didn't think through all of the implications of it, and you responded maybe poorly in something that probably you regret after doing it. It's because you didn't have the time to kind of think through it. And part of this seeking after God is saying, hey, God, guide me so that I don't make rash decisions, that I don't make bad decisions, that I don't make things that I would regret. And so when we do this, we start here, we're able to make better decisions. We're able to kind of do this in the right way. Because every time, if we get this out of order, if we don't start with seeking God, then none of the other steps I'm going to lay out this morning will work. You have to start with seeking God. But remember, that's not just a once and done thing. This seeking God is a continual thing. Something you see throughout Nehemiah's life is that he continually does this. He's constantly seeking God. And when we do that, then we can move to step number 2. Step number 2 is that we clarify the vision. In Proverbs chapter 29, verse 18, it says, where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained, but happy is one who keeps the law. Now, you may be reading that and you'll be like, well, that doesn't seem so bad. Unrestrained kind of seems nice. Like, I don't want to be bound. I don't want to be held down. But the reality here is when this verse is talking about, it's not talking about not being or about being bound or not being bound. It's talking about guidance and talking about direction. If you've ever been given the task of doing something and with no direction, kind of like, hey, go and clean the house, right? It's a little overwhelming when you have to talk about the whole house. So just clean the whole house and you're not given any form of direction. Or maybe it was you told your kids, hey, clean your room, but you didn't tell them where to start. There's no guidance. then a lot of times it can be overwhelming. It can be difficult to actually do it. You don't know where to start. You don't know how to do it, and you have to have this kind of vision or guidance to it. So when this passage is saying, hey, where there's no vision, the people are understanding, saying, when there's no vision, there's no guidance. And people are kind of just doing things however they kind of feel like it at the moment. And it doesn't help you accomplish anything. And so you can be motivated, but if you don't have the vision, then you won't be able to accomplish anything. Have you ever read something in which it was trying to describe or trying to explain something, but then as you read it, you're like, I am actually more confused now than when I started. Like, I don't know what you're trying to tell me, but I don't get it. That's for sure. Or maybe you have a friend who likes to tell stories this way, where they start a story and then they get a few minutes in and they tell you about something that happened, and then you got to have the side story, and then they talk about this for a while, and then there's another side story off that, and you're like, I do not remember what we were talking about over here. I'm not sure if there was a point. But if there was, I don't know it, right? Because when we don't have guidance, when we're not focused in, then we can't accomplish anything. And that's the whole point. That without this idea, without vision, without direction, you won't be able to do anything. So we have to clarify, and we have to kind of define that vision. In Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 5, we see Nehemiah and his vision. It says, I replied, if it was to please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. That's his vision. Hey, this is what I want to do. I want to go and rebuild my city, the city of my people. It's not this big, lots of different steps, lots of different things. No, the vision is clear and it's defined and it's really simple. And that's what he was doing, and that's what we were called to do. And because when we want to make a difference, when we want to be the change in the world, we have to have this vision to kind of focus us on. I don't know what your vision is, because the vision for each and every one of us is going to be different. Maybe your vision is to go and help people in the inner city. Maybe it's to help single moms. Maybe it's to help people who have had loss in their life. Maybe it's to help people who have gone through painful relationships, or those people with money issues, or that have dealt with depression and dealt with suicide, or many other issues that we can see in this day and age. That is your vision. I don't know what that's like, but you've got to spend the time to say, hey, I'm going to define that. I'm going to clarify that. I'm going to say, hey, maybe I have to write that down. Maybe I need to get Post-it note and write it down, stick it on my mirror or something. I have got to write out and kind of define the vision, because without that vision clearly articulated, I won't be able to accomplish anything. I can't move on from this step. And it may be daunting. It may feel like this big task. And to some extent it is, but we have to work at that. We've got to grow, and we've got to actually go and say, hey, I've got to figure out what the vision is. And so we say, hey, I'm going to seek after God. I'm not going to create the vision on my own. I'm going to start with seeking God. Then God's going to help me define this vision. Then I can go to step number 3. And step number 3 is to make the plan. Let's look at Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. It says, I also said to the king, if it pleases the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me the timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself. And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. And so here you see kind of the plan laid out. It wasn't 100 steps, but it was like, hey, these are things that I need to get done. This is realistically what is going to happen. And so he lays it out. Now, I don't know about you, but I've played sports a lot through my life, and if you've played sports, then I think you have had a number of different coaches, and some of your coaches are probably better than others, right? Some of those coaches are the kind of coach that goes home and thinks about how the game went or how practice went. And they start to analyze the team and say, hey, this is their weak point, this is their strength, this is what we've got to work on. And then, of course, they use the trusty old Google and YouTube to find out drills to help them improve. And they spend the time prepping for the next practice. And then when they come to practice, they're ready to go. But then you've also probably had coaches that have not. And they didn't think about the sport at all during the week. And they just like, you know what, we're just going to do the same drills. Or we're going to just kind of wing it, and as things come up, we'll just kind of go at it, and we'll kind of figure things out. And the reality is, if you have both of these coaches, you know which one's the good coach is. The one that's going to help your team get better, the one that's going to improve them. Because when you're not prepping, when you're not preparing, when you don't have these things done, when you're not thinking through it, then it won't go well. And this is true about more than just team sports. It's true about music. It's true about work. It's true about life in general. The reality is that plans are necessary. They are necessary. They're helpful. And so Nehemiah's plan was simple but defined. It was give me a letter for safety, give me wood, give me time to rebuild the city, and it allowed him to be successful. But I think that this step can honestly be one of the hardest because it involves the most work, right? We have to ask ourselves questions like, hey, what do I need to do in order to accomplish this vision? What do I need? What are the steps I need to do to make this happen? How can I raise the funds, or how can I raise this or that? How do I get the things that I need? What are the important things? What is it that I need? What's a good time frame to accomplish these? How can I do this? These steps are not easy to do. And the research can be hard. It can be difficult because you might not know what to do. Maybe it's that you have to go and talk to the people that you're trying to reach and say, hey, how can we help in this situation? You have the vision, and you're like, okay, how can we accomplish this vision? So you go and you start to talk to people. But this step requires legwork. It requires effort. It requires work. But the reality is when we put in the work, when we start to do it, then the outcome happens. And that's part of it. And that's where we have to say, hey, I've got to have this plan. I've got to build this plan so that we can accomplish something. But when we do that, when we start with seeking God, then we move to, okay, we have the vision, then we move to making kind of the steps, then we can, and only then can we actually get to step number 4. And step number 4 is motivate others. Because when you don't have a clear plan, it's hard to motivate other people. But in Nehemiah chapter 2, we see Nehemiah going, and he's already in Jerusalem, and he's talking to the Jewish leaders of the area, and this is what he says, but now I said to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me and how about my conversation with the king. And they replied at once, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. Now, motivating others for some may actually seem to be one of the most difficult ones because maybe you're not the kind of person that likes to go and talk to people. Maybe you're not the kind of person that likes to go and search out that. But here's the reality. Motivating others is not about you convincing others to God's plan. All right? It's not about you giving them 10 steps. So, hey, I'm going to convince you. I'm going to do all the hard work. No, it's about saying, hey, here's the vision. Here's what we want to accomplish. Here's kind of here's the way that we can accomplish it and how you can step in on that. And then if we've actually started with seeking with God, we rely on God to do the convincing. So we're saying, hey, this is the vision that I want to do. And here's the steps on how to do it, and I want you to be a part of that. Then God is the person who actually makes that happen. But guys, without people working alongside of you, things just don't work very well. Think about Nehemiah, right? His task is a big task. His task it's too big for him to do by himself. It's certainly not something he can accomplish by himself. But if he hadn't have gone into the hard work of saying, hey, I need to convince these people to work with me, because he probably went in there not sure how that conversation was going to go. Saying they could say yes, but they could also be afraid because they've tried fixing things up in this area and they've been destroyed and they've been attacked when they've done doing it before. So maybe this isn't going to work. So when he's going in there, he doesn't know how that's going to go, but he says, hey, I need help. I can't do it on myself. If he tried to do it on himself, he would probably still be trying to rebuild the wall today, right? He wouldn't have finished. He wouldn't be complete. That's the task that was ahead of him. And the reality is the good work that he was given, that God was saying, hey, here's what I want you to do. He wasn't strong enough. He wasn't capable enough to do it on himself. God said, hey, I want you to lead. I want you to share the vision, and I want you to kind of formulate the steps. I want you to guide people. The same thing's true about us. The good work that God has for each and every one of us, we are not good enough for. We are not capable of doing on our own. God is saying, hey, I want you to lead and guide people towards that. And that's the point of the church. A major element of the church is that we are doing things together, that we are called to do God's work, the good work that God has placed for each and every one of us together. And so that's kind of that's what part of being the church is helping each other, being what Nehemiah needed at his time for other people. And the reality is, when we utilize the passion, that heartbreak that we talked about last week, when we say, hey, these things that are in my life that I see as a need to help, a need to say, hey, I need to do something about, I can't just stay there anymore, I've got to do something about. When we utilize that passion to kind of motivate us towards these steps of saying, I'm going to seek after God, continually seek after the plan that God has for me. I'm going to put the hard work of making the vision and creating the steps and motivating people to it. Then we can actually be successful in what God has called us to do. Then we can motivate others to action. But here's the cool part. It might not just be that the things that you the motivation that you have for other people, it might not just be that they now come alongside of your vision and your mission that God has given you, but you might actually motivate them to start the good work that God has placed in their life. Your effort, and you could be encouraging them to actually start what God has called them to do. And so this revolving door kind of thing where we keep helping others as well. And so we look at all these things and say, hey, I can do this by simply starting the good work. By simply saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to step out of the fear that may have been stopping me, or the uncomfortableness or the uncertainty, to say, hey, I'm going to start the plan that God has for me. And that's the goal, is to simply say, hey, I'm going to start the work. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to start through these steps. But simply, I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take that first step. I'm going to start working towards that and simply seek after God. And the challenge is to simply start doing the work that God has placed in your life. To use that heartbreak that happened in your life to motivate you to start the work. Let's pray. Dear God, we're so thankful that you are a good God. We're so thankful that you motivate us and help us. But God, we're so thankful that you promise to do a good work in our lives and through our lives so that we can make a difference to the people around. We're so thankful that you have promised that what you have begun in our lives, that you will finish. We're also thankful we don't do this alone, God, that we do this through the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives, that you're working in our lives like you worked in the life of Nehemiah. Help us utilize the heartbreak in our lives to accomplish and to motivate ourselves to accomplish these things that you have called us to do. Help us seek after you so that we can create a vision and steps and a plan so that we can actually do the good work that you have called us to do, to be the difference that you would have us be in this world. Help us motivate others, not by convincing them, but God, help us motivate others by clearly giving the vision and the mission that you have given us, and you stepping in and convincing them to step alongside of us. Help us motivate others to do the work that you have called us to do. God, I pray that in everything that we do, all the actions that we do it not for the praise of others, but God, for the glory of you. Pray all this in your name. Amen.